I'm Andy Brookes, work in the business school. My main focus has increasingly become around sustainability. I'm also interested in change as well. So why is it that we're finding it so difficult? Despite widespread commitment, we're still finding it such a challenge to make a difference. I'm really speaking on behalf of my colleague Matthias Barlow, who I work very closely with. So these are some of the ideas from some of the work we're doing. I'm just sharing those ideas with you. Occasionally me and Matthias will present together. Matthias presents on his own, but I wanted just to share that Matthias is here at least he's here on this slide, if not in person. And that's a very enigmatic photo that he has on his staff profile, looking very enigmatic there. So we only have to look at the news and we can see these sustainability challenges. It becomes quite challenging to carry on watching the news every day sometimes. But these challenges, we almost can't avoid them. This was only back in September with that huge catastrophe of the 2 dams collapsing in Libya due to excessive rainfall. And I think still a month later, it's unclear how many people were killed and how many people were injured. But at least 4,000 people killed and at least 10,000 missing, I think. So a huge number, huge catastrophe. And early indications are that it's very unlikely that would have happened, that excessive rainfall, if it wasn't for climate change. So there's a very clear link between climate change. So we talk about let's achieve net zero by 2050 and look into the future, but the climate has changed. It was only last year that we recorded the highest temperature ever in the UK, only about 20 or 30 miles from here. So it feels global, but it is actually very local as well. I don't think we reached that temperature this year, but even across Europe, I think estimates are there were 60,000 excess deaths due to the heat wave in Europe in 2022. So they're almost quiet figures, these. We're not aware of them. They do come out in reports sometime after, but they're almost quiet catastrophes that we don't see for some time. But huge figures of death. So we do have a responsibility to act. But also, important to have an emphasis on climate change, but there's other catastrophes happening, again, quietly at the same time. Huge rate of biodiversity loss. Species are going extinct all the time, but the rate at the moment is said to be about 1,000 times more than the natural background rate. And that's bad for us as humans. Not just we're losing animals that are nice to experience, but it's bad for the planet, it's bad for biodiversity, and likely to increase the likelihood of pandemics, etc. The more we reduce that biodiversity. And for me, it's a sad thing as well. We had a young child in the family a few weeks ago, and I just thought, we've lost 60% of our wildlife since I was a child. Children coming into the world now, much more depleted planet. So it's sad in a way. So there's an emotional thing for us to act that we don't, in 50 years, have a further loss, which would be so sad. So environmental challenges, environmental sustainability challenges, also very much interconnected with social sustainability challenges as well, which in many cases we're going in the wrong direction with. COVID accentuated, the COVID pandemic accentuated a lot of these challenges. Poverty for many got worse. I think 100 million people more went into poverty after COVID. The 6 richest people in the world, which I think were all men, doubled their wealth during COVID. So it went from 700 billion to 1.5 trillion dollars. So there's something underlying about inequality that drives a lot of our sustainability problems as well. A fantastic technical and scientific achievement to develop the vaccine, but in our unequal world, we couldn't actually get that vaccine out to everybody that needed it. So that accentuates that problem. Huge crisis around people being displaced, and really pernicious problems like modern slavery, which we've known about for a long time. But again, we're aware of it, but we're finding it hard to deal with it. In some ways, we know what the problems are. We've changed the discourse quite well over the last 20 years, that we're aware of the problems. We've got some lovely graphics that present the problems. I think this is in several posters around the business school and the university. Often you see politicians wearing a nice lapel badge with this on. But the head of the UN said, despite that, we're actually way off track from achieving those goals. I think psychologically as human beings, we're good at setting goals because it makes us feel we do get a psychological benefit from that. But actually then we're not quite so good at doing the hard work to achieve the goals. And the UN's latest document last year was saying, this is urgent. We may talk about 2050, but we need to be taking urgent action now. And this isn't a particularly radical organisation, the UN, but it's really saying we need to change society, which is easier said than done. And there is an ethical challenge to this as well, that all these effects that we're talking about, these inequalities, climate change particularly, impacts disproportionately on the poorest parts of the world. So that graph really is showing the impacts of climate change and the impacts of these sustainability challenges. So really the least affected are probably the worst polluters and the biggest cause of climate change are the least affected by its impact. So there's an injustice there, but it probably indicates why enough hasn't been done to change it. Just going back to a sort of one of the key thinkers who used to work in the business school, the world we've created is a product of our own thinking. So unless we change our thinking, it's unlikely we're going to be able to change the world. And we must learn to see the world anew. So we tried to get Einstein as our key speaker to talk about mindset, but he was already here talking about adopting a new mindset. So really that's what this little session is here today, saying we do need to change our mindset. Business as usual clearly isn't working. We can't stay with our old view. And this is summarising what Einstein's saying. We can't just carry on operating with the same view. And I'm suggesting we need a bigger view, that the sustainable mindset is a bigger view, thinking of things in a broader way. So I'm thinking three parts really. One is, if we have a sustainable mindset, it means we actually think about the problem differently. The other one is about actually thinking about, it enables us to look at the root causes. That's probably one of the reasons we're not making progress, because we're doing lots of activity, but we're not addressing the root causes. And sustainability is making a genuine transition, actually genuinely moving away from where we are now. Reframing the problem. Part of the problem, I think, is the word sustainability itself. It's become ubiquitous. We use it if we walk around Sainsbury's, or it'll be up everywhere, sustainability. It's almost become normalised and lost its power. So I think it's useful to go back to let's go back to the Latin of where it comes from. But it obviously comes from the English word to sustain. And the Latin, I think, I did about 6 months of Latin about 40 years ago, sustinere in Latin. But it's really got two parts to it, which we don't often address. One is this idea of something lasting a long time. So to be sustainable, it needs to endure, it needs to last. But the other part is this sustenance. Another part of sustain is being sustained. Sustenance, nourished, providing what is needed. And unless something is getting the sustenance, it's not going to endure. So clearly we're losing all those species, for instance, because we're actually blocking off what they need to survive. Our current way of organising the world is preventing the sustenance of a number of those things that are becoming extinct. And those are the sort of things we need to change. We can also think of sustainability as the property of a system. So a sustainable system will be one that produces human and ecological flourishing. Doesn't quite feel like the world we've got at the moment, based on those previous figures. So I think we need to recognise up front our current system is unsustainable because we're not providing everything that's needed to flourish. In all respects, so I think there's a rise in poor mental health across the world. That is because we're not providing what people need to flourish, however our system is organised. And I think it's useful, I'm trying to make more of this word unsustainability today, because if we're going to make a transition, we need to recognise where we are, which is unsustainable, and move away from that towards sustainability. So this idea of sustainability only means something if we talk about unsustainability as well. Similar that up doesn't mean anything unless we have got a concept of down. Actually, sustainability and unsustainability are part of the same concept. So let's think about the problem itself. Well, at the heart of the problem is this idea that this science, the reality that the world is getting hotter. Relatively not that much, 1 degree. And that graph just shows the change since 1860. But we're going above the safe limits now, above that 1 and going up towards 1.5, where even the changes we've seen so far to the climate will even get more catastrophic. So there's clear evidence now of the temperature. You get very wide fluctuations, which is the grey line, but that's the average line going up. So there was a mini sort of ice age ending around about 1860. So Charles Dickens, apparently, when he was a boy, lived in a period of very cold weather, where I think the Thames froze and they had snowy winters for about 10 years. And that's partly informed why he wrote Christmas Carol, because he lived in a period that was very much like that. We've not had any winters like that since in London. So we've really moved on to do that. So what is the cause of that? Well, one of the causes of that, or the primary cause, very faded diagram, is the increase in CO2 levels in the atmosphere. Now this goes back about 800,000 years. So the very early climate scientists 800,000 years ago were measuring the CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course they weren't, but those are all done from drilling down into ice, the polar ice cap. So we can drill into the ice and we can measure the CO2 in the ice. And it was very stable all the way across, round about, the graph starts to rise around about 1780. Quick question, what happened in 1780? So almost, when on the website, you can put the line on where it goes up. And then if you look on Wikipedia, the date of the Industrial Revolution is almost exactly when that line starts to go up. So when we started to burn fossil fuels, that line goes up. It gets even steeper, almost exponential towards the right-hand side. Particularly from about the 1980s, it gets even steeper. Any sort of ideas about the 1980s?
Deregulation.
Yeah, I think a deregulation of markets, privatisation, again linked to population increase as well, but a much more freedom for the markets, and again more fossil fuel burning increased. So the underlying cause of that is human activity, human behaviour, unsustainable human behaviour. And clearly that is what we need to change. So if we dig down below the causes, we've got the warming, the CO2. The only way we can tackle that is to change unsustainable human behaviour. So that's the thing we need to change. If we're going to change anything, it won't be a single technological solution. The technology will help, but we need to change our behaviour. So what are the root causes of our unsustainable behaviour? Well, what I would argue is we need to wear this bigger pair of glasses, an ecological pair of glasses. One of the challenges has been that we've seen the economy operating separately to society, as if we can run the economy and it works perfectly well on its own, and society and nature is something that's totally separate. And really an ecological view recognises the reality that we are the economy and society. So M1 on the top was this sort of old view, if you like, that we can have things separate. A more ecological view recognises the economy and society is bounded in the environment. We are a species among other species, and we live within the natural world. It's an absurdity to think we operate separately from the natural world. We are within it, and we're bounded by it. And clearly we're seeing this even for things like our basic food systems are being threatened now. But our modern systems have separated us from the reality of the world we live in. I'm very ignorant on many of these things, but this is a crisis now at a very basic level that we're running in many places. A scarcity of bees is stopping us pollinating our food. And I think there was a picture in one newspaper of somebody hand pollinating plants with a paintbrush. We've moved to quite a level of damage if we cause that. And when we look at why those pollinators that are so crucial to our food production for our survival, why are they declining? Unsustainable human activity. Difference in land use, pollution, climate change, pesticides, and all of those things. So it goes back to unsustainable human behaviour. Again, not a radical journal, but the New Scientist, this is over 10 years ago, really identified one of the major problems of our unsustainable behaviour is our economy, or the current way that we operate our economy is crucial to the damage that we're causing. Unless we do something about the way we operate that economy, we will carry on damaging it and destroying it. But this isn't anything new. This book came out when I was at school in the 1970s, that we're already recognising then that there was a limit to us carrying on growing the economy as we are. It already said in 1972, we're out of balance with nature. So we've wasted 50 years when we knew this problem already. We can't waste the next 50 years by pretending we can carry on with the same model and get a different result afterwards. It keeps on flashing on and off, but this was a paper by Daly. Again, he worked for the World Bank, and he said the problem is we're running the economy as an isolated system. Makes lots of sense on itself, growth figures, profitability, wealth, but it makes no sense if we do it in isolation. It probably worked, this is a rather old diagram, but when the economy was quite small compared to the rest of the world, it sort of worked because we could damage it without causing catastrophic effect. The problem is now the economy is so big, we've reached the limits. There isn't even the space now to move on. It was unacceptable before, but it's totally unsustainable now. I'm going to pick up some questions at the end, so yeah, I don't want to frustrate any. Yeah. And basically, we've reached the limits there, so we can't carry on operating that economy. It's got nowhere to go, and we're starting to get system collapse. Now, we did an experiment, not that we intended to, we did an experiment a couple of years ago where we switched the economy off for a few months. When we were all in lockdown, we switched the economy off and it would have been a difficult experiment to do deliberately, but we could see what happened when the economy was switched off. And this was one that was well publicised, dolphins swimming up the Grand Canal in Venice. I think there were many places in the world where people, I think places in Asia where they could see mountains appear in cities where they'd not seen them before. So this almost proves it's the economy and the way we're running the economy that is making the difference. And we need to do something different. So our business as usual economy makes sense on its own, but doesn't make sense when we have it in relation to the world. Is based on a whole number of unsustainable assumptions. The idea of unlimited growth on a finite planet makes no sense. We'll run out of resources. We've got a lifestyle that's very comfortable in many parts of the Western world, but we cannot replicate that lifestyle around the rest of the world. It's fundamentally unsustainable. There aren't enough resources. To feed that growth, we have to have lots of consumption, overconsumption, to feed that growth. Again, it's a patently unsustainable thing. Consumption of resources and the disposal of unwanted consumption is obviously causing us huge problems. I think there's huge areas in, I can't remember where it was, I think it was Chile, where lots of brand new branded clothing gets dumped. Huge swathes of these branded clothing, never been worn, but our model of consumption and growth means that we have to have a new brand the next year, so we just dispose of that. Fundamentally unsustainable. Clearly, just the exploitation and depletion of resources is unsustainable. As we saw from the pollination, the more we take away our habitats, we reduce the animals that are needed to produce our food and pollinate our food. So again, unsustainable. Jumped a bit ahead there. The fact that we've moved to this more globalised, connected system, we've taken a lot of the complexity out of the system. So we've simplified the world, we've connected it, which again has made it less sustainable and increased the opportunities for exploitation as well. And a dominance on the market was the last one there. So reframing the problem, it's about us. It's about unsustainable behaviour. Principally, it's about the way our economy runs. And we need to find different ways of running that economy. Otherwise, we'll carry on getting the same answer for the next 50 years. So how do we make the transition? What do we need to do differently? Well, Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of England. Again, not a radical left-wing economist in any way, very traditional economist. He did a whole series of brief lectures that spoke about how we've made a shift in values, that the way we run our economy and society, the thing we primarily value is market and the money. So finance and the market is driving the decisions we make in the way we run our society. And he's saying we need to make a shift. So part of this transition is a shift in values. We need to make a shift from everything being done. Almost, we'll only deal with sustainability if we can afford to. Well, it's ludicrous. We can't not afford to do it. So we need to think differently about that. Even the person that was one of the founders of the sort of CSR movement, John Elkington, the first person that came up with what was quite radical at the time, that we need to have the 3 Ps, people, planet, the triple bottom line, people, planet and profit. He actually a couple of years ago said, I've had second thoughts. Can I pull my paper back in? It's out of date. I need to do some of that. He recognised that the idea of people, planet and profit was misguided. That profit should never be put on the same line as people and planet. So there's something about fundamentally changing these values. Something about thinking of what is the purpose of our economy. Is the purpose of our economy just to generate wealth that might trickle down to other people and create a benefit? Or should the purpose be about well-being and flourishing? The problem I think we need to do with our bigger pair of glasses is break away from our very narrow thinking that's guided by our Western cultures as well. There's been lots of other thinking around the world. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but buen vivir is a whole philosophy in South American countries and elsewhere about a different way of living. And just the idea about living in harmony with nature and more respect for nature is something that we need to inject in the way we think about doing our economy. But there's plenty of work being done now to already think, well, what do we need to do to redesign our economy? The problem is it's still not mainstream. It's still not the way we think about doing our economy, and it needs to become more mainstream. So even, this is from about 2010, large part of work was done by the Sustainable Development Commission to look at what would a sustainable economy look like. So there's ideas out there, there's work out there. But we really need to change some of the basic levers and rules that mean that the best way to make money isn't through the thing that's causing us the most problem. So one of the most profitable businesses still, which perhaps even some of my pension is still invested in, so I'm still part of this system, it's still ludicrous in a way that we can make the most money through the thing that's destroying us. So it's ludicrous. We could change the rules of tax and other things to change the rules around that, but we enable it to happen. We need to change our institutions and the way we do things. So there's another COP meeting, I think, in a few weeks, the 28th COP meeting. This is slightly out of date, but we've had 24 COPs. And the world's just we've carried on pumping more CO2 and the world's been getting hotter. Now, there's not a cause and effect there. It's not because of the COP meetings. But you just wonder, well, why do we carry on having this yearly gathering of global leaders? And it's making actually the curve has got steeper. So we need to change our institutions. But some of this is about, we are taking action. We are starting to decarbonise some of it and make a transition in some of our sectors. So this will be hard work and a struggle. And partly what today is about, what does all this mean in practice at different levels? But part of it is looking at our sectors. Some of it can happen at organisational level, but unless we look at our food system as a whole, unless we look at our transport system, we'll not be able to change it by acting piecemeal. And this is a section from that UN document, but we already know that we're making progress in some of these areas, but we need to do the hard work to do more of it. And what does that mean for an organisation like the university or businesses in Lincolnshire? Well, we need to make this transition away from our current business model. And we need to be reflecting on what is our current business model and to what extent are we currently unsustainable? How can we start planning a transition away from what we do now? And if we're doing any of these things, this is just one model of unsustainable business archetypes, but we can use these sorts of models to really evaluate how our current business operates. How unsustainable are we? So just pulling something of that together, really we need to make it, we can talk vaguely about this future ideal state of sustainability. I think we need to be rooted in the reality of where we are now, which is unsustainability, recognising what is unsustainable and starting to make a transition away from that. We're out of balance with nature, looking at everything we do, how can we become more in balance with nature? We could talk about 2050, but we need to be talking about now. What are we doing now that we can start changing that? How can we work from, amongst others, really an economy that's based on extraction at the moment, and fossil fuel burning, waste and pollution, to genuinely regenerative resource use, genuinely decarbonising, and some of those other philosophies, like the buen vivir, is much more about sufficiency. Why do we need those things? We've created a world where we want things rather than things that we actually need. So much going more back to reuse, recycling, circular economy, all those ideas. But it's fundamentally looking at how our businesses, our sectors work and changing them. And really working from where we are now, which is that extensive harm and destruction, to is what we're doing enabling human and environmental flourishing, so it can at least start repairing itself, human systems and those other systems. Societal change seems difficult, but it does happen. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a fundamental change in the nature of work. We've had a huge societal change where, for instance, in my job, the default now is to have a meeting online. It's almost like a special meeting to say, oh, shall we meet in person? It's almost, that's not the default anymore. Now, that wasn't a centrally planned change, and it happened very, very rapidly, basically because one rule changed: you must work at home. And that forced this change. So I think this gives us some hope, actually, that society can change very rapidly if we can change some of those important levers. I don't think we're going to achieve this transition by a long-term, planned, step-by-step change. It's going to be quite evolutionary, quite organic, but we need to create a way to let the system adapt very rapidly, like we did in COVID. From our recent experience of the HS2 project, if we try and plan long-term change, it's very difficult and often fails. So the final one is we need to move from the unsustainable present to a sustainable future. Final couple of implications and conclusions. I think it does involve personal transition. I'm not standing up here thinking I'm the most sustainable person in the room, which I'm not. I'm probably the biggest hypocrite in the room. But I'm trying to make some transition. So last couple of years, gone on holiday on the train rather than flying. They're all minor things, but they are a transition. I've sold a car so I can start coming to work on my bike. So things like that. They're small things, but I haven't really looked at where my pension is invested. So I've still got lots of things to do. I think it's important, but it's not enough at individual level. I think at organisational level, we need to look in at our own business models. And I don't think it's about every organisation having a sustainability strategy. In some ways, that puts it in a little box and the rest of the business can operate as business as usual. I think every business needs its entire strategy and model that is sustainable to make it fundamental. Otherwise, we'll do what we've been doing for 50 years, having sustainability departments, and the rest of the organisation just carries on. So I think that is a fundamental shift. We need to have an infrastructure and institutions that support this. So it's not good enough just to shift the mindset. We'll need to have things that support it, things that enable businesses and giving them incentive to do that. And we need these wider transformations. The UN has just run a couple of huge global events around food system transformation. The food system is a major footprint on the world. And we need to radically change. There's something of an opportunity in a way. We need a whole set of new businesses to emerge, to adapt to, as this transformation inevitably happens, we need new businesses. Even if it's just dealing with helping nature recover, we need new businesses and services to do that. Climate has changed, so we're going to need to find ways to adapt to that. Even if we stop it getting any worse, we've still got work to do. And we need more businesses operating in social good. So it's about the mindset and the institutions. And at the heart of it, I think this is sort of the philosophy behind this event. This isn't about somebody from the business school pontificating with a few ideas. I think the only solution is a collaborative solution and working collectively to make things happen.